Well, it seems to me that it would be impossible to be a human being and understand what it means to be a human being in the same way after we became able to leave the earth. It seems to me that human beings can't understand what it means to live on this earth, to wear this skin, to inhabit this corner of the galaxy in the same way as our ancestors did before they could step back and literally leave the planet, take a picture, and show us our home from thousands and millions of miles away. It gives us a perspective. Maybe not on the long time view, but on the long away view. Some of the first pictures that we have from outer space of our Earth came in the 1940s. Before we were able to send human beings away from the planet, we shot rockets up into space and took photos back, piecing them together bit by bit in what we would now think of as kind of a crude way of doing it. But these are the first black and white images looking back at our Earth from space. Later, crew of one of the Apollo spacecraft were able to watch the moon rise. Not the sun rise, but they watched the Earth rise from the vantage point of the moon. One of my favorite pictures of the perspective of where we live and who we are and what our story is comes from a little bit further away from that, and it's this one. Can you find us? This is what's called the image of the pale blue dot from the Voyager spacecraft. Voyager was flying millions of miles away, tens, hundreds of millions of miles away from the planet, and the cosmologist and philosopher Carl Sagan asked the folks at NASA if, when we got as far away as possible, when the camera would still work and transmit a signal, could we please turn the ship around, take a picture of Earth right at the last minute? And this is what we got. We're up there, the pale blue dot. That's what we look like. Sagan, in his classes and in his book and in essays on that same title, The Pale Blue Dot, would say to a group of students or gathered people, every single story you've ever heard of any person ever happened right there. Every terrible moment, every moment of terror, every birth, every couple that ever fell in love, every great empire or every terrible empire, every humble servant, every dictator, every politician, every great dream, every great failure, every nightmare, every hopeful vision, everything we've ever known happened right there. On that pale blue dot, as he said, a dust mite suspended in dark space. Now, for Carl Sagan, the takeaway for this was that as human beings, knowing what we know now, which the greatest of thinkers who have given us advice and wisdom couldn't know themselves, Jesus, the Buddha, couldn't see that picture for all of their wisdom. He said the fact that we know it has for him an inescapable call to humility. That was his main takeaway from staring back at the earth from millions and millions of miles, was that now that we know it, we can't not know how little we know. It was a Socrates moment. For Carl Sagan, there's almost no more powerful takeaway from the grand story of all that is, but the realization that we are very small and we know very little. Now, in our reading this morning from Gordon Atkinson, this Baptist preacher laying on his back, looking exactly in the other direction, watching a pine tree send down a hopeful helicopter seed into enemy territory of lawn mowers and hot Texas asphalt, he says that for him, his innermost desire is to have the kind of patience that he sees evident in those trees that take the long view. And for him, he reads into the fabric of creation itself hope. He interprets the action of those seeds falling down, of the trees standing patiently waiting for us to go away so that they can retake the land. Following what he says is the call of grand Creator, he says they are hopeful. He's thinking that built into the fabric of creation itself is hope, that those trees want to create new trees, and that they're willing to wait us out. A lot of my own personal sense of spirituality comes from taking in the natural world or cosmology and space. And one of my favorite books with scripture on my nightstand is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. For those of you who haven't read it, it's kind of like a modern Walden that a woman in her young life writes on the creek bed, watching nature go by for a couple of years. And in the book she says, people always talk about how efficient nature is, and for her, how efficient God is. How just the right amount of leaves fall and decay and become soil like we do to grow a tree. That just the right amount of light pokes in through the atmosphere. And she says that's nonsense. If you pay attention, it's not efficient at all. For her, God spends more leaves than is necessary to make soil and just throws them everywhere. That more of those hopeful seeds have to fall down than you would possibly imagine for 2 or 3 pine trees to poke up through the soil. She says that God, that the grand Creator, that nature itself is, in her words, wasteful and extravagant. Like a mad scientist who just keeps mixing up a batch of something until something comes out of it. She talks about the hard parts of nature, about watching a water bug suck the life out of a frog in front of her, and says, is that a benevolent Creator? She says that the natural world works in the opposite of how you and I might design it. She says it's kind of like if you and I were to run a train company, and we wanted to get 2 trains from Lynchburg to Danville, and she's referencing a Johnny Cash line in there and hiding it. She says if you want to get 2 trains from Lynchburg to Danville, you would design 2 good trains and put them on tracks that you already built, and they would go right from one place to the next. But God, she says, nature, she says, does the exact opposite, throwing thousands of trains on tracks that haven't yet been built with no destination. Many of them hurl off the tracks, causing destruction, and a few of them get there. But there is not where you thought it would be. She stands by the creek bed for 2 years, and her takeaway is God is willing to try anything once to see if it works. Crazy beetles with horns, and animals that resemble aliens, fish that swim in the bottom of the ocean with lights hanging from their heads at the deepest parts of the seas. And she says whatever God is, it must love to experiment, and it must love failure. Because as she says, evolution and nature and the holy mystery uses death and failure so much more than it uses success. I read her book as scripture and read into it in my life that there's a kind of grace built into the fabric of creation itself. That whether I'm good or bad, whether I've answered all my email or not, whether I'm successful in my career or not, whether our relationships succeed or fail, the sun will shine tomorrow on us all. And when it stops shining, it will take all of us with it. I look at a universe in which all things ultimately decay in a matter that creates something else, that dying stars explode and become new life and new creation, that you and I will make our way into the soil once again, out of which those pine trees grow, and I sense that it loves the fact that we don't have to be perfect. That our hearts will beat, the air will move through our lungs, whether we are good or not. I read into that grace. Now at home, when we're trying to teach this great story to our son, The story in which over 13 point some odd billion years, a universe that seems to love creating and testing and novelty, a universe in which the craziest things you'd ever imagine have happened. But it's older than any of us. We read a book to him often called Before the Beginning, a child's first book of the great story. The great story is the term that evolutionary biologists and cosmologists give to from the beginning to now. 13 point some odd billion years. And in this story, it says this. We're talking to a child here. A long time ago, before you were born, before I was born, before the beginning of the very first day, everything lived and dreamed as one thing. One thing. Our family, our house, the wind, the ocean, the mountains, all the stars, everything were together in one place. And that place was so small that everything was one thing. And that one thing was very, very, very small. Do you want to know about the time before the beginning? Well, that's a great mystery, and no one can tell you. Together we have an exciting story to tell, though, and you get to tell one of the best parts. Your part is magical and scary and happy and sad and wonderful, and you're the only one who can do it. Sometimes you will make the story happen, and sometimes the story will happen on its own. In this story, there are terrible monsters, noble princes and princesses, joyful dancing, high mountains to climb, special presents to open, and horrible storms. And warm and misty mornings when the sun peeks out over red and yellow trees. This is not a story we will tell with words. We will tell it with our lives, and no one knows how it will end. I look at a grand story like that, the biggest view, the view back from millions and millions and millions of miles. And for me, I read that the very creation of which we are a part includes in it a call to humility. It says, we don't know what we don't know. We are so small. I look at a story that goes back billions of years of hopeful pine seeds making their way into soil and stars exploding, and I sense in it some grace built into the fabric of reality itself. A grace in which all things must give of them their very selves in order for new life to exist, and they don't ask permission of the next thing to be good before they do it. The star doesn't care whether giraffes are going to be created when it explodes. It just does it. And I read into this long story of the very fabric of creation of which we're a part, and I read hope into it. Like that preacher on his back staring at the trees, I sense a creation, a universe, a God that will not stop trying new things, including us. Now, we as Unitarian Universalists have inherited a pretty optimistic understanding of the long trajectory of the world and our place in it. Our Unitarian ancestors said that creation was inherently good, created by a good God. They believed that human beings were inherently good, even like God. In fact, they talked about the progress of humankind onward and upward forever, they said. They just thought things are great and they're going to get better. The progress was built into matter itself. Our Universalist ancestors believed that every person, every religion, every atom was on a train bound for God. And you couldn't get off. Theodore Parker, a famous Unitarian Universalist minister and abolitionist, even wrote into matter morality. He said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The story is long. We may not get to the end of it, we who are in this room, but it bends toward justice. You've heard those words later rephrased and summarized by Martin Luther King, and now they're sitting on a rug in the Oval Office. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. How optimistic is that story? And I love that story. I love the notion of a good green earth filled with good and loving people and a universe that is on its way toward justice. And yet, as my wife and I prepare to welcome our new child into the world in about a week, give or take some time, I've been reflecting a lot on the nature of the creation into which we will welcome him, into the world that we will send him into. Does the arc of that world bend toward justice, as the story goes? As much as I believe that there is hope built into the fabric of reality, as much as I believe that there is grace and forgiveness, if I'm speaking poetically, built into reality itself, as much as I believe that you cannot be human anymore knowing what we know without being humble, I wonder, will he know humility? And in the world that we're in, will he know grace and forgiveness? And will he be hopeful about its future? So I'm reflecting on these things, which I believe from a cosmic sense exist. It occurs to me that really the only times I've known hope and grace and humility haven't been in the presence of stars, but of people. I have yet to be forgiven by a star. Could have happened, but I don't know about it. I've yet to experience what is truly possible with our lives apart from being together with humans. And I've yet to be humbled in the same way before stars as I have people. As a minister in this congregation, I get to work with hope and humility and grace here, mostly because of you. You want to talk about the great mystery? Try to get to know one other human being really well. Try it. One person. It's enough. I think I know more about the galaxy than I do the people that live in my home. Every week, someone walks into our office and talks about a fundamental part of their identity or their life that we didn't know before, that you don't know yet. A great struggle that they carry with them, a terrible storm, a monster, as the children's book said, or a wonderful morning where trees shine with light that we just didn't know about. Being with people has taught me as much humility as staring in the stars. Being with people has taught me grace more than the cosmos has. How else do you get 1,000 human beings trying to build the beloved community on earth without grace? You need grace if 2 humans are in the same county, let alone 1,000 of them in the same building. If you commit yourself to this institution, the other shoe will drop. You will be disappointed. You'll walk away heartbroken sometimes and joyful at others, because this institution is filled with human people who make human mistakes. And I've learned with you the art of forgiving and being forgiven. I've seen more about what's hopeful here and with you than I ever have staring through a telescope, as holy as it is. Because I know how little I'm capable of alone, but how much we are capable of together. And so I realize that one of the keys to living a meaningful life isn't just knowing the great story, the trajectory of the universe, the grand play in which we all participate. It's knowing what your part in it is. And finding other people who seem to know what their part of it is. For me, a meaningful life isn't just the perspective of a long view. It means taking our time, our money, our spirit, and investing it in places that make you feel like you are part of the biggest story ever told. It means knowing that not too long from now, we will be the soil out of which those pine seeds grow. And before that, if we don't want to waste it, we should give all the money, time, energy, passion, volunteering, and spirit we can to institutions and relationships that make us feel like we play a meaningful role in existence. And I hope that this is one of those places for you. I really do, or else why are we doing it? I hope that here you sense that while we might get hope from the stars or grace from the universe, if you dedicate yourselves to this place like the people who have been here for 25 and 50 and longer years, you will know grace because you will have to forgive a human being in this room or be forgiven by them. Your part in the story, as it says in the book, is magical and scary. It's happy and sad and wonderful, and sometimes you'll make the story happen, and sometimes it will happen on its own. And in this story, there will be terrible monsters, noble princes and princesses, joyful dancing, high mountains to climb, special presents to open, horrible storms, and warm, misty mornings when the sun peeks out over red and yellow trees. I have no idea if the universe cares about us. I don't know if God, whatever God is, has the kind of perception that even sees an individual human life. I don't know if the universe or nature or the force or whatever you or I call it does care that much or see us. But I do know from the stars and from telescopes and watching creek beds and trees and you, that we live in a universe where almost anything is possible. That we live in a world where the holy force behind all things just won't stop trying new things. That we live a life as human beings in which grace and forgiveness are always, always, always possible. And I have known this in the times when we are not alone. And we are not. Give yourself to relationships and people that make you feel like you are part of the biggest story ever told. It will pay off over and over again. May it be so. Amen.